Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. The Dark Web Challenge that ended with a stranger in my house. Hey everyone, I've never really shared much on here before, but after what happened to me, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there can help me make sense of it. Or maybe it'll serve as a warning. Either way, here it goes. It all started a few months ago when I stumbled upon a subreddit dedicated to urban legends and horror stories. You know the type. Creepypastas, paranormal encounters, all that good stuff. One night, after a few too many drinks, I decided to dive deeper into one particular thread about the dark web. People were sharing stories about crazy stuff they had found there, and one comment stood out. Try the Dark Web Challenge, if you dare. Now, I'm not a complete idiot. I know the dark web is a dangerous place, but curiosity got the better of me. Plus, the guy who posted it seemed pretty convincing. He claimed the challenge was simple. Visit a certain URL, follow the instructions, and record your experience. In return, you'd get access to a hidden forum with more exclusive content. I thought, what the hell? It's probably a prank. So I decided to give it a shot. I downloaded Tor, set up a VPN, and typed in the URL. The site was bare bones, just a black background with white text. The first instruction was to enter your email. I created a burner account and did as told. The next step was to wait for an email. About an hour later, I got a message with a new link and a single sentence. Are you ready to play? I clicked the link and a video feed popped up. It was just a dark room at first, but then a figure appeared. He was wearing a mask, one of those plain white ones with no features. He didn't speak, just held up a sign that read, "Turn off all the lights." I was already getting uneasy, but I turned off the lights in my apartment. The next sign said, "Put your phone on the table and don't touch it." I complied. Then he held up another sign, "Stay silent and watch." What followed was about 30 minutes of static. Just when I thought it was some elaborate prank, the video cut to a close-up of a different person. This one wasn't wearing a mask. It was a woman, tied to a chair, gagged and visibly terrified. Her eyes were wide with fear, tears streaming down her face. I felt my stomach drop. The masked figure returned, holding a knife. He moved towards the woman slowly, and despite myself, I couldn't look away. He didn't kill her. At least not then. Instead, he started to slice her skin. Shallow cuts at first, then deeper. The screams were muffled by the gag, but they were there, echoing in my silent apartment. I was paralyzed, too horrified to close the laptop. This couldn't be real, right? It had to be some sick special effects or something, but it looked so authentic. The blood, the way she struggled, the raw fear in her eyes. It was all too real. The video abruptly ended, replaced by another message. Your turn. Find someone. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. I felt like I was going to be sick. What the hell had I gotten myself into? I tried to brush it off as some messed up prank, but the unease wouldn't leave me. Over the next few days, I kept getting emails from the same address. They were short, just reminders. Your turn. Time is ticking. I ignored them, hoping they'd go away. But one night, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It said, "We're watching. Your turn." Panic set in. How did they find me? I hadn't given out any personal information. I considered going to the police, but feared they wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. Then things got worse. One night, I was woken up by the sound of something downstairs. I live alone, so any noise at night is unusual. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept down the stairs, heart hammering in my chest. In the living room, my laptop was open on the coffee table, the screen glowing. The video feed was back on. This time, it was my living room. I was looking at a live feed of myself, holding the bat, staring at the screen. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. They were in my house. I spun around, trying to spot the intruder, but the room was empty. I checked the doors and windows. They were all locked. I even searched the entire house, but there was no sign of anyone. I was alone, but someone had been there. Someone who was still watching. That night, I barely slept. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house made me jump. By morning, I was exhausted and terrified. I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to figure out what to do. That's when I got the final email. Last chance. Your turn, or we'll come back. I knew I was out of options. They had found me once. They could do it again. And next time, I might not be so lucky. All right, here we go again. I'm not sure why I'm even writing this. Maybe to keep myself sane. But here's part 2. After the last email, I was a wreck. I knew I had to do something, but every option seemed insane. I thought about going to the police again, but I knew they'd probably think I was crazy or worse, some kind of criminal. I even considered running, but where would I go? They'd found me once. They could do it again. The fear of them returning was unbearable. Every shadow, every little noise set me on edge. I started sleeping with the lights on, bat by my side, but sleep was scarce. Then one night, I got another email. This one had an attachment, a video. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The video started with the same dark room, but this time the masked figure was holding up a sign with my address on it. Then the camera panned down to show a knife, and then it cut to black. No words, but the message was clear. I had to play along, or they were coming for me. I knew I couldn't ignore them anymore. I didn't want to involve anyone else, but I also knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to come to me. I needed help. I thought about who I could trust, and finally, I called my friend Jake. We've known each other since college, and if anyone would believe me, it was him. I told him everything. He was skeptical at first, but the fear in my voice must have convinced him. He came over that evening, and I showed him the emails and the video. His face went pale. Jesus, man, this is serious. You need to call the cops. I can't, I replied. What if they think I'm involved? Or what if they can't do anything, and these guys come after me for real? Jake thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, we'll figure this out together. We spent the next few hours trying to come up with a plan. We decided that Jake would stay with me for a few nights, and we'd set up some cameras around the house to see if we could catch whoever was doing this. Maybe, just maybe, we could get some evidence and go to the police with something concrete. The first night was tense. We stayed up late, watching the feeds from the cameras on my laptop. Every little noise had us jumping, but nothing happened. The same for the second night. By the third night, we were starting to relax, thinking maybe it had all been some elaborate prank, and they'd given up. Then around 3 a.m. on the fourth night, one of the cameras picked up movement. We were in the living room, and the camera facing the back door showed someone trying to pick the lock. Jake and I looked at each other, and without a word, he grabbed the bat while I called the police. The operator said they'd send someone over, but we knew we had to buy some time. The lock clicked open, and the door slowly creaked. We could hear footsteps, soft, deliberate. Jake positioned himself behind the door, bat raised. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. The figure stepped into the kitchen, and just as he moved towards the living room, Jake swung the bat. The intruder went down with a grunt, the mask falling off. It was a man, mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and wild eyes. He was wearing black clothes and gloves. He groaned, trying to get up, but Jake hit him again, knocking him out cold. We tied him up with some rope I had in the garage, and finally, the police arrived. They took him away, and we gave our statements. I handed over all the emails and the videos. The cops assured us they'd investigate, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They probably thought it was just some crazy guy who decided to mess with me. For a while, things seemed to settle down. The police kept me updated, but they didn't find much. The guy we caught didn't talk, and they couldn't trace the emails or the website. I started to hope it was over, that maybe they'd leave me alone now. But then, a week later, I got another email. This one was different. It wasn't from the same address, but the message was clear. You didn't finish the challenge. Attached was a video. It showed Jake's apartment. The camera panned through his living room, his kitchen, then his bedroom, where he was sleeping. The last shot was a close-up of his face, peaceful, unaware of the danger. The video ended with a text overlay. Next time, we won't be so kind. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They weren't just after me. They were willing to go after anyone close to me. I called Jake, frantically explaining the new development. He agreed to stay with me for a while longer, but we both knew we couldn't keep this up forever. We tried to keep a low profile, but paranoia had taken root. Every stranger felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. The stress was eating away at both of us. I barely left the house, and Jake was constantly looking over his shoulder. Then one night, we heard it again, the sound of someone downstairs. We grabbed our weapons and crept down, but this time the house was empty. No sign of forced entry, no one on the cameras, but on the kitchen table was a new note. We're watching. Finish the challenge, or everyone you care about will pay. We were trapped. I knew I had to end this, but I had no idea how. The fear was suffocating, and the stakes were getting higher. I couldn't let anyone else get hurt, but what could I do? Jake and I sat in silence, the weight of the situation crushing us. I could see the fear in his eyes, and I knew he saw the same in mine. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was a fight for survival. Okay, back again. Part 3. If you're still with me, thanks for sticking around. Things are about to get even worse. After that last note, I knew I had to do something, anything, to stop this nightmare. Jake was looking at me like he was about to crack, and honestly, I felt the same way. We couldn't keep living in fear like this, waiting for the next message or the next intruder. That night, we barely spoke. We were too exhausted, too scared. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even when the cameras showed nothing. It was like the walls themselves had eyes. Then it hit me. The cameras. What if they were being hacked? What if these sick bastards had been watching us through our own setup? I shared my suspicions with Jake, and we decided to take down the cameras. We tore them off the walls, yanked out the cords, and smashed the devices. It was a small victory, but it made us feel a bit better, at least for the moment. We spent the next day reinforcing the house. New locks, barricades on the doors, even a security system that wasn't connected to the internet. We were desperate, clutching at any semblance of safety. That night, Jake stayed in the guest room, and I tried to sleep in my own bed for the first time in weeks. It was quiet, too quiet. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what could happen next. Then around 2 a.m., I heard it, a faint scratching sound. It was coming from the basement. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the bat and tiptoed to Jake's room, waking him up. He was groggy, but alert in seconds. We crept to the basement door, the scratching growing louder. It sounded like someone trying to dig their way in. We opened the door slowly, the creaking hinges making us wince. The basement was dark, the air damp and musty. We flipped on the light, but it barely cut through the gloom. The scratching continued, more frantic now. As we descended the stairs, the noise stopped abruptly. We stood there, listening, waiting. Then a cold draft hit us, and we saw it. The basement window was open, the latch broken. Someone had been trying to get in, or maybe they had been in, and we'd interrupted them. We checked every corner, every shadow, but there was no one there. Just that broken window, swaying slightly in the breeze. We sealed it up as best we could, using wooden planks and nails. It was a temporary fix, but it made us feel a bit safer. Back upstairs, we tried to figure out our next move. We couldn't keep going like this, living in fear, waiting for the next attack. Jake suggested we go back to the dark web, try to find the original challenge, and see if there was a way to end it. It sounded insane, but we were desperate. We set up a new laptop, fresh and untainted, and logged back into the dark web. The URL was still in my history, so we followed it back to the site. It looked the same, bare bones, with that eerie black background and white text. But now, there was a new message. Welcome back. Are you ready to finish the challenge? We clicked on it, and a new video feed popped up. This time, it was a room we didn't recognize. It was dark, with a single chair in the middle. The masked figure appeared again, holding a sign that read, "Bring us someone, or we'll bring someone to you." Jake and I stared at the screen in horror. They wanted us to kidnap someone, to bring them a victim. We couldn't do that. We wouldn't. But then the feed changed. It showed a live view of Jake's apartment again. This time, there were people inside. His girlfriend Sarah and her little brother Ben. They were tied up, gagged, tears streaming down their faces. The masked figure stepped into the frame, holding a knife to Sarah's throat. The message was clear. If we didn't do as they asked, they'd kill them both. We were trapped. If we went to the police, Sarah and Ben would die. If we tried to run, they'd find us. The only option left was to play along, at least for now. We had to buy some time, figure out a way to save them without becoming monsters ourselves. The next few days were a blur. We pretended to go along with their demands, sending messages through the dark web, asking for instructions. All the while, we were planning, trying to find a way to outsmart them. Then one night, we got a break. Jake was going through the old video feeds looking for clues when he noticed something. In the background of one of the videos, there was a reflection in a mirror, a logo on a van parked outside the window. It was a small detail, but it gave us something to go on. We searched the logo online and found the company. It was a local business, a delivery service. We staked out their warehouse, hoping to find a lead. And then we saw him, The man from the videos, the one we'd knocked out and handed over to the police. He was working there, just another employee, blending in. We followed him, careful to keep our distance. He led us to a run-down building on the outskirts of the town. We watched as he went inside, noting the address. This had to be it, their hideout. We called the police, giving them the address and telling them about Sarah and Ben. We didn't mention the dark web or the challenge, just said we'd found them. It was risky, but we had no other choice. The raid happened fast. The police stormed the building, guns drawn. Jake and I watched from a distance, hearts pounding. It felt like an eternity, but finally, they brought out Sarah and Ben, safe but shaken. They also brought out the masked figure, unmasked now, a man in his late 30s, looking terrified as he was shoved into a squad car. The nightmare was over, at least for now. The police thanked us for our tip, but we knew we couldn't relax. There were still others out there, still watching, still waiting. Jake and I moved to different towns, changed our numbers, cut all ties to our old lives. We didn't speak of the challenge again, but sometimes, late at night, I check my email, half expecting another message, another threat. I don't know if they're still out there, waiting for their next victim, but if you ever see a message inviting you to the dark web challenge, please, for your own sake, don't click it. It's not worth the risk. Alright, so here we go with part 4. Thanks for sticking around. This part's going to get dark, so brace yourself. After the raid, things were quiet for a while. Jake and I tried to rebuild our lives, but the paranoia never really went away. Every knock at the door, every unknown number on our phones, it all felt like a potential threat. Jake moved to a small town in the Midwest, and I relocated to a different city on the East Coast. We kept in touch, but our conversations were brief and cautious. We both knew that we could never really go back to how things were before. One night, about 3 months after the raid, I was home alone. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I was struggling to fall asleep. The events of the past months had left me with a chronic sense of unease. I was scrolling through my phone when I got a text from an unknown number. "We haven't forgotten." My heart sank. I immediately called Jake, but he didn't pick up. Panic set in, and I tried calling again. Still no answer. I texted him, urging him to call me back, but there was no response. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at my phone, waiting for a call or a text that never came. The next morning, I got another text from the same number, an address followed by "Come alone" or "Jake dies." I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't leave Jake to face whatever these maniacs had planned. I armed myself with a knife and headed out, my mind racing with fear and anger. The address led me to an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the town. The place was falling apart, windows broken, the air thick with the smell of decay. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Inside, the warehouse was dark and filled with old machinery. The only light came from a flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. I could hear muffled voices coming from deeper inside. I followed the sound, heart pounding, trying to stay hidden. I found Jake in a small room at the back of the warehouse. He was tied to a chair, bruised and bloody, but alive. The masked figure from the videos was there too, along with 2 other men, both wearing black masks. One of them was holding a knife to Jake's throat. The masked figure turned to me, his eyes cold and empty. "You didn't follow the rules," he said, his voice distorted by some kind of modulator. "Now you'll both pay." Before I could react, one of the men lunged at me. I barely managed to dodge the knife, swinging my own wildly in defense. The fight was brutal and chaotic, the room filled with the sound of grunts and clashing metal. I managed to knock one of the men out, but the other was relentless. He slashed at me, cutting deep into my arm. Pain shot through me, but I kept fighting, adrenaline driving me forward. I finally managed to disarm him, but the masked figure stepped in, grabbing me by the throat and slamming me against the wall. "Your turn," he whispered, pressing the knife against my skin. I struggled, but he was too strong. Just as I felt the blade start to cut, Jake, somehow free of his bonds, tackled the masked figure to the ground. They struggled, but Jake managed to grab the knife and plunge it into the man's chest. The masked figure let out a gurgling scream and went limp. The remaining man fled, leaving us alone in the blood-stained room. We were both injured, but alive. We stumbled out of the warehouse and called the police. This time, we told them everything: the dark web, the challenge, the masked figures. They took our statements and promised to investigate, but we knew better than to expect much. These people were ghosts, operating in the shadows, always one step ahead. Jake and I knew we couldn't stay. We parted ways, each heading to a different part of the country, hoping to disappear for good. We changed our names, our appearances, cut all ties with our old lives. Months passed, and slowly I started to feel a bit safer. The paranoia was still there, but it was manageable. I found a job, made new friends, tried to move on, but the nightmares never really went away. Every night I saw the masked figure, heard his distorted voice, felt the knife against my throat. Then one night I got a call from Jake. It was the first time I'd heard from him since we'd parted ways. He sounded frantic, terrified. "They found me," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know how, but they found me. You have to run. You have to." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. Panic set in again, and I knew I had to leave. I packed a bag, grabbed my cash, and fled, not knowing where to go, just needing to get away. As I drove through the night, I realized the awful truth. There was no escaping them. No matter where I went, they would always find me. The dark web challenge wasn't just a game. It was a death sentence. Here we are, the final part. Thanks for sticking with me. If you're reading this, I hope it serves as a warning. Stay away from the dark web. Here's how it all ended. After Jake's frantic call, I was in full survival mode. I kept driving, switching motels every night, paying in cash, keeping my head down, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me again. About a week later, I was in a small town in the middle of nowhere, trying to get some sleep in another cheap motel. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's time to finish this." I felt a cold dread settle over me. My first instinct was to run, but I was tired of running, tired of living in fear. They had taken everything from me, my peace, my safety, my friend. I had nothing left to lose. I replied, "Where?" The response came almost immediately, an address on the outskirts of the town. I grabbed my knife, took a deep breath, and headed out. The address led me to an abandoned farmhouse, its windows boarded up, the door hanging off its hinges. The place looked like something out of a horror movie. I stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The air was thick with dust and decay. I could hear faint voices coming from somewhere deeper in the house. I moved cautiously, knife ready. heart pounding in my chest. The voices led me to the basement. As I descended the creaky stairs, the dim light revealed a horrifying scene. Jake was there, tied to a chair, beaten and bloodied. 3 masked figures stood around him. The leader, the same one we thought Jake had killed, smiling cruelly behind his mask. "Welcome," he said, his voice still distorted. "We've been expecting you." I tightened my grip on the knife, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let him go. This is between you and me." The leader laughed. "It's never that simple. You both failed the challenge, and now you both pay the price." One of the masked men moved towards Jake, brandishing a knife. I reacted without thinking, lunging at him with everything I had. We struggled, but I managed to knock him to the ground. The other 2 advanced on me, but Jake, summoning his last bit of strength, kicked one of them, throwing him off balance. The leader grabbed me, slamming me against the wall. His grip was like iron, and I could feel the breath being squeezed out of me. He leaned in close, his eyes cold and merciless behind the mask. "You can't win," he whispered. "We are everywhere. We are everyone." But then Jake, with a burst of desperate energy, tackled him from behind. The leader stumbled, releasing me. I gasped for air, and then, with a surge of adrenaline, drove my knife into his chest. His eyes widened in shock, and he collapsed to the floor. The remaining masked man hesitated, then fled up the stairs. I didn't follow. My only concern was Jake. He was in bad shape, but alive. I untied him, and we staggered out of the farmhouse, supporting each other. We didn't stop moving until we reached my car. As I drove us to the nearest hospital, I could see the fear and exhaustion in Jake's eyes, mirroring my own. We were both scarred, physically and mentally, but we were alive. At the hospital, the police took our statements, but this time, we told them everything. The dark web challenge, the kidnappings, the masked figures. They were skeptical, but the evidence was there. Jake's injuries, the dead man in the farmhouse, the videos on my phone. They had no choice but to believe us. The investigation took months, and the media got hold of the story. Dark web horror, they called it. The authorities managed to track down a few more members of the group, but many were still out there, lurking in the shadows. The dark web was vast, and its denizens were elusive. Jake and I went our separate ways again, but this time we kept in touch. We knew we couldn't let our guard down, but at least we weren't alone in this anymore. We had each other, and that made a world of difference. I've moved several times since then, never staying in one place too long. The fear never really goes away. I still get the occasional email or text, reminders that they're still out there watching, but I've learned to live with it. The dark web diary that predicted my every move. Alright, I need to get this off my chest. I'm not looking for attention or karma. I just need to share what happened. Maybe someone out there will have some advice, or, I don't know, maybe it'll just help me process everything. This all started about 6 months ago. I was in a bit of a rut, spending way too much time online, and I ended up diving into the dark web out of sheer boredom and curiosity. Stupid, I know. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just browsing through random forums and hidden sites, trying to see what all the fuss was about. One night, I stumbled across a site that looked like an old-fashioned blog. It was plain, almost like something you'd find on GeoCities back in the day. The URL was a random string of characters, and the title was simply The Diary. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The first entry was dated from about a year ago, and it seemed like the ramblings of a paranoid schizophrenic. The author talked about being watched, hearing voices, and seeing shadows that weren't there. It was unsettling, but nothing I hadn't seen before in other dark corners of the internet. Then I saw the latest entry. It was dated the same day I found the site. That alone was weird, but what really freaked me out was the content. It described someone who sounded exactly like me, down to my appearance, my job, even the layout of my apartment. The entry ended with a prediction that this person, me, would find the diary that very night. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was a bizarre coincidence or some elaborate prank. But something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me. How could it be so specific? The next day, I checked the site again. There was a new entry. This one described my day in detail. Waking up late because I forgot to set my alarm. The exact conversation I had with my boss about a project deadline. Even the shitty sandwich I had for lunch. It was like someone had been following me around, taking notes. I started to feel paranoid. I covered my webcam with tape, unplugged my smart devices, and even started looking over my shoulder when I was out. But the entries kept coming, and they were always accurate. No matter what I did to change my routine, the diary documented it perfectly. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it would just stop if I didn't give it any attention. But then the entries started getting darker. They talked about my private thoughts and fears, things I had never told anyone. They described my nightmares in vivid detail, and the worst part was that I started having dreams that matched the diary's descriptions. One entry mentioned a specific nightmare where I was being chased through a dark forest by a figure with no face. I woke up that night drenched in sweat, and the memory of that faceless figure haunted me throughout the day. Then things started happening in real life. I found my apartment door unlocked when I was sure I had locked it. Objects would move around or go missing. I kept hearing whispers in the dead of night, but whenever I tried to pinpoint the source, there was nothing there. One particularly disturbing entry described me finding a dead bird on my doorstep. The next morning, sure enough, there was a small mangled bird lying right in front of my door. It looked like it had been tortured before it died. Its tiny body twisted in unnatural angles. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the police, but they were no help. The officer I spoke to didn't take me seriously, probably thought I was some kind of nutcase. He said there was nothing they could do about a spooky website and advised me to stay off the dark web. In a desperate attempt to get to the bottom of this, I started digging deeper into the diary's older entries, hoping to find some clue about the author. But the more I read, the more I felt like I was losing my mind. The entries were all written in the same style, with the same level of detail and the same creeping sense of dread. I realized that whoever was writing this had been doing it for years, documenting the lives of different people and always ending with something horrible happening to them. One entry described a woman finding her husband hanging in their garage. Another talked about a man who was driven to insanity and ended up in a mental institution. I started to fear for my own sanity. Was I just another subject in this sick person's diary? What was going to happen to me? The latest entries hinted at something worse coming, something that filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. And then, one night, the diary predicted my death. It said I would die in my apartment, alone and afraid. My body found days later by a neighbor who noticed the smell. It even described the exact way I would die. A brutal stabbing, my blood soaking into the carpet. I couldn't sleep after reading that. Every creak, every shadow, every gust of wind outside my window sent me into a panic. I felt like I was being watched constantly, and the fear was driving me to the brink of madness. I don't know what to do. I feel trapped in my own home, terrified to go outside, but even more terrified to stay in. The diary's prediction looms over me like a death sentence, and I can't escape the feeling that my every move is being controlled by some unseen force. If anyone has any advice or has experienced something similar, please let me know. I don't know how much longer I can take this. Things have gotten worse, much worse. I thought the diary predicting my death would be the peak of my horror, but I was wrong. The entries have become more detailed, more invasive, and increasingly disturbing. I've stopped going to work, afraid of what might happen if I leave the relative safety of my apartment. But even here, I don't feel safe anymore. After the prediction, I tried to ignore the diary. I avoided logging back onto the dark web, hoping that if I didn't read it, it wouldn't come true. But the anxiety gnawed at me, making it impossible to stay away. Eventually, I caved and checked the site again. The latest entry wasn't about me. It was about my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. It described her daily routine in meticulous detail. Her morning walks, her gardening, even the type of tea she drank every afternoon. The entry ended with a chilling prediction. Mrs. Thompson would have a fatal accident in her garden. I wanted to warn her, but I knew how crazy it would sound. 2 days later, I saw the ambulance lights from my window. Mrs. Thompson had fallen while trimming her roses, impaling herself on one of the wrought iron garden stakes. The sight of her lifeless body being wheeled away still haunts me. It was exactly as the diary had described. I'm convinced now that the diary isn't just predicting these events, it's causing them. But how and why? I can't help but feel like I'm a pawn in some twisted game. I need to find out who's behind this, and I need to stop them before it's too late. I've started researching the dark web more thoroughly, trying to trace the origins of the diary. It's not easy. Everything is encrypted, and the people who frequent these sites are notoriously secretive. But I've managed to find a few clues. There's a username that keeps popping up in the comments of the diary entries. Watcher. Watcher seems to be the diary's author, or at least closely connected to them. Their comments are cryptic, often just single words or phrases that don't make much sense. But there's a pattern. Watcher always posts a comment shortly before a new entry goes up, almost like a signal. I've tried reaching out to Watcher, leaving messages on the site, but I've gotten no response. It's like screaming into the void. Meanwhile, the entries about me continue. They've started to include details that no one could possibly know. Things I've never shared with anyone. Private thoughts, childhood memories, my deepest fears. The latest entry was the worst yet. It described a box arriving at my door, containing something of great personal significance. Sure enough, a package showed up yesterday. It was an old shoebox, battered and worn. Inside was a collection of my childhood toys, ones I hadn't seen in decades. I have no idea how they got there. I moved across the country years ago, and most of my belongings from back then are long gone. Seeing those toys, my favorite action figure, a stuffed animal I used to sleep with, brought back a flood of memories, but it also filled me with dread. The diary knew about these items, knew how to find them, and somehow brought them back into my life. I feel like I'm being taunted, pushed closer and closer to the edge. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, my dreams are plagued by that faceless figure from before. It's always the same. I'm running through a dark forest, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears, the faceless figure getting closer and closer. I always wake up just before it catches me, but the terror lingers long after I'm awake. The diary entries are now predicting every small detail of my day. Yesterday, it said I would find a crack in my bathroom mirror, and sure enough, there it was when I went to brush my teeth. Today, it mentioned a black cat crossing my path. I haven't left my apartment, but a stray black cat appeared outside my window this afternoon, staring at me with piercing green eyes. I'm losing my grip on reality. I've started drinking heavily to numb the fear, but it only makes things worse. I hear whispers, even when I'm awake now, soft voices that seem to come from the walls, telling me things I don't want to hear. I can't tell what's real anymore. I've started to suspect that someone is watching me, even when I'm alone in my apartment. There's a constant feeling of being observed, like eyes on me from every angle. I've torn my place apart, looking for hidden cameras, but I haven't found anything. Still, the feeling persists, driving me to the brink of insanity. I don't know how much more of this I can take. The diary's latest entry has left me paralyzed with fear. It described a scene in excruciating detail. Me, lying in a pool of my own blood, my eyes wide open in terror, my throat slit. The entry ended with a single chilling sentence. It will happen tonight. I don't know what to do. I'm barricaded in my bedroom, writing this on my laptop, but I can hear noises outside my door. Soft footsteps, the creak of floorboards. I'm terrified to open the door, but I'm equally terrified to stay here. I don't know how this will end, but if you're reading this, please be careful. Stay away from the dark web, and if you ever come across a site called The Diary, close it immediately and never look back. If you're reading this, I need you to understand, I'm not crazy. I know how this all sounds, but I swear it's real. This diary, this nightmare, it's all happening, and I'm barely hanging on. After the last entry, I spent the night huddled in my bedroom, clutching a kitchen knife. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed like it was coming for me. The noises outside my door grew louder, scratching, tapping, a soft mocking laughter. I was too terrified to move. At some point, I must have passed out from exhaustion because I woke up the next morning, still gripping the knife. My body ached from the tension, and my mind was a foggy mess. I checked the diary immediately, dreading what I might find. The latest entry was different. It wasn't just a description of my day, it was a direct message to me. It read, "You can't hide forever. I see you. I hear you. You belong to me now." I threw my laptop across the room in a fit of rage and fear. The screen cracked, but I didn't care. I was done being a puppet in this sick game. I needed to do something, anything, to take control back. I decided to leave my apartment, get away from the place where I felt most vulnerable. I packed a bag with some clothes, my laptop, and the knife, and headed out. My plan was to drive to a friend's house a few hours away and figure things out from there. Maybe with some distance, I could think more clearly. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every car that passed seemed to slow down just a bit too much. Every pedestrian on the sidewalk seemed to stare a bit too long. My paranoia was reaching new heights, but I kept going, desperate to escape. I finally arrived at my friend Lisa's house. She's one of the few people I trust, and I hoped she'd understand, or at least let me crash on her couch while I figured things out. When she opened the door, the concern on her face was immediate. "Jesus, you look like hell," she said, pulling me inside. "What the hell happened to you?" I tried to explain everything, from the dark web to the diary to the predictions, but it all sounded so insane. I could see the skepticism in her eyes, but she let me stay anyway. I set up my laptop on her kitchen table, determined to track down Watcher, or anyone who could help me. That night, I slept on Lisa's couch, clutching the knife under my pillow. I woke up several times, sweating and panicked, sure that someone was in the room with me. But each time, it was just shadows and my overactive imagination. The next morning, I checked the diary again. The entry was about Lisa. It described her morning routine, her coffee, her shower, even the book she was reading. It ended with a horrifying prediction. "She will die tonight. You cannot save her." I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't let this happen. I told Lisa everything, showing her the diary entry. She looked at me like I was losing my mind, but agreed to stay inside with the doors locked and windows shut. We spent the day in a tense silence, both of us on edge. I kept checking the time, counting down the hours until nightfall. As the sun set, I made sure every door and window was secured. We sat in the living room, the TV on for background noise, trying to pretend everything was normal. But as the hours passed, the atmosphere grew heavier. Lisa tried to keep me talking, asking about anything to distract us both. But my mind was elsewhere. I was listening, straining to hear any unusual sounds. And then we heard it, a faint tapping at the window. Lisa froze, her eyes wide with fear. I motioned for her to stay quiet and crept towards the window, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was taunting us. I peeked through the curtain, but saw nothing, just darkness. The tapping stopped. I turned back to Lisa, trying to reassure her, but then we heard it again, this time at the back door. Someone was definitely out there, playing with us. I called the police, trying to keep my voice steady. They said they'd send someone over, but I knew it would take time. Too much time. We huddled together in the living room, every creak and groan of the house making us jump. The diary entry flashed in my mind, the words burning into my brain. "She will die tonight." I couldn't let it happen. I had to protect her. But how? Then the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and Lisa screamed. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and handed it to her, trying to stay calm. The tapping started again, more insistent, now coming from multiple directions. We heard the front door rattle, like someone was trying to force it open. I felt a surge of adrenaline and positioned myself by the door, ready to attack whoever came through. But the rattling stopped, replaced by that eerie, mocking laughter from my apartment. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the back of the house. Lisa screamed again, and I ran towards the noise, my heart pounding. In the dim light of the flashlight, I saw the back door had been kicked in. A dark figure stood in the doorway, its face obscured by a hood. "Get out!" I yelled, brandishing the knife. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Then it lunged at me. I slashed with the knife, but the figure was fast, dodging my attacks. We struggled, the flashlight clattering to the floor, plunging us into near darkness. I could hear Lisa sobbing in the living room, but I couldn't get to her. The figure knocked the knife from my hand and grabbed me by the throat, squeezing until I could barely breathe. I felt myself losing consciousness, the edges of my vision darkening. But then, suddenly, the pressure released and the figure let go, stepping back into the shadows. I gasped for air, scrambling to find the knife. When I finally grabbed it and turned the flashlight back on, the figure was gone. The back door was wide open, the night air chilling me to the bone. I ran back to Lisa, who was huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. "We need to get out of here," I said, helping her to her feet. "Now." We bolted out the front door, running down the street until we reached a neighbor's house. We banged on the door until they let us in, explaining what had happened. They called the police, and we waited, terrified, until they arrived. The police searched Lisa's house, but found no one. No signs of the intruder, no clues, nothing. It was like the figure had vanished into thin air. They took our statements and promised to keep an eye on the place, but I could tell they didn't believe us. Lisa and I stayed at a hotel that night, too scared to go back. I kept checking the diary, dreading what I might find, but there were no new entries. It was as if Watcher had disappeared along with the figure. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if we're safe or if this is just a temporary reprieve. But I do know one thing. I'm not going to stop until I find out who's behind this and make them pay for what they've done. If anyone out there has any information, any clues, please help me. I can't do this alone. I haven't slept much since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see that hooded figure, hear that mocking laughter, but I can't let the fear consume me. I need to end this, to find Watcher and stop the diary once and for all. Lisa and I decided it wasn't safe to go back to her house. We rented a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, thinking we could lay low and figure out our next move. The first few days were tense, but nothing happened. No new entries in the diary, no strange noises, no shadowy figures. It almost felt like a bad dream. Almost. One evening, I got a message on one of the forums I'd been posting on. It was from someone named Whisper, claiming to have information about Watcher. They wanted to meet in person, somewhere public. It sounded risky, but I was desperate. I couldn't keep living like this. We arranged to meet at a diner in a small town nearby. Lisa insisted on coming with me, and I was grateful for the company. We arrived early, choosing a booth in the back where we could see the entrance. I kept my hand on the knife in my pocket, ready for anything. A man walked in, looking around nervously. He spotted us and approached, sitting down without a word. He was thin, with hollow eyes and a twitchy demeanor. He introduced himself as Whisper and quickly got to the point. "Watcher isn't just one person," he said, glancing around, as if expecting to be overheard. "It's a group. They call themselves the Architects. They're obsessed with control, with manipulating people's lives through fear." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why me? Why us?" "You were chosen," Whisper replied. "I don't know why. Maybe you were just unlucky, or maybe someone in the group took a particular interest in you. But once you're on their radar, it's nearly impossible to get off." Lisa leaned forward. "How do we stop them?" Whisper hesitated. "There's a server. deep in the dark web. It's where they upload the entries, where they communicate. If you can find it and destroy it, you might be able to cut off their power, but it's heavily encrypted, almost impossible to find. Almost, I asked, clinging to that small hope. There's a way, he admitted, but it's dangerous. They'll know you're coming for them, and they won't let you get close without a fight. We left the diner with more questions than answers, but at least we had a lead. Whisper had given us an address, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It sounded cliché, but I was willing to try anything at this point. That night, we drove to the warehouse, armed with nothing but a laptop, some basic hacking tools Whisper had provided, and my trusty knife. The place was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. We found a way inside through a broken window and made our way to what looked like an old office. Lisa set up the laptop, and I followed Whisper's instructions, trying to access the server. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if this was a trap? What if they were waiting for us? As I typed in the last command, a new message popped up on the screen. It was from Watcher. "Hello, John. We've been expecting you." The screen flickered, and suddenly, the room was bathed in a dim red light. The air grew cold, and that familiar, mocking laughter filled the space. I spun around, knife in hand, but saw no one. "You can't win," the voice said, echoing around us. "We control everything. You're just a pawn in our game." I felt a surge of anger. "No more games," I shouted. "This ends now." With a final keystroke, I initiated the sequence Whisper had given me. The laptop screen filled with lines of code, and then, abruptly, it went dark. The red light faded, and the laughter stopped. Silence. We waited, breathless, expecting something to happen, but nothing did. Slowly, cautiously, we made our way out of the warehouse, half expecting the hooded figure to jump out at us, but the night remained still. Back at the cabin, I checked the diary one last time. The site was gone, replaced by a simple message: connection lost. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that everything went back to normal, but the truth is, I'm not sure. The paranoia is still there, the fear that they might come back. Lisa and I are taking things one day at a time, trying to rebuild our lives. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers. I still see shadows out of the corner of my eye. Maybe they're gone for good, or maybe they're just waiting for the right moment to strike again. If you've read this far, take my advice. Stay away from the dark web. You never know what you might find, or what might find you. And if you ever come across a diary that seems to know too much, close it and run. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Stay safe, everyone, and trust no one